Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Just say a huge thank you to everyone who has been watching and commenting. To those of you who are new here, welcome. My name's Silhouette. I post monthly now. It used to be weekly, but just my schedule at the moment, my main job and then the gigs, it just all got a bit too much. So I will be posting once a month, but I always post on the community page when I am about to post. Now this video is going to be out later on this week, so I will put a post out, so keep your eyes peeled and hit your notifications bells. So if you missed a post, hit your notification bells and you'll be notified of when I do post this video. Now, today's case is one you probably will know, you probably will have heard of. I am going to be covering the Jordan McSweeney case. The reason I chose this one for this month, there's a couple of reasons. So I actually had the displeasure of meeting Jordan many years ago. I was 18 and I was living in a hostel, and there was a particular group that he was friends with that also lived in the hostel, particularly the two brothers. And obviously I'm going to go into Jordan's background and everything throughout the video. Jordan was what we would consider a chav, and straight away, and obviously just because he had that sort of aesthetic about him, that wasn't the reason I wasn't interested in really talking to him. You guys know that when you meet someone, you just seem a bit off with them. They're not the person you want to speak to, and it has nothing to do with their aesthetic, it's just the way they come across. And this was Jordan. He never really extended past, "Hi, how are you?" But I just distinctly remember him. And obviously the boys that he was hanging out with, they had that same aesthetic. But I was actually really friendly with them. They were brothers. And obviously, with the crimes that Jordan got related into when he was a teenager, not necessarily what we're going to be talking about with the murder, but before that, with burglaries and whatever, one of these brothers was also doing that, but he's completely turned his life around. Obviously, the hostel that we were living in, it was for people that really had nothing. None of us had anything, and this particular man, he has completely turned his life around. He's in a stable relationship for many years. He's had children, working a really good career, and the other brother, he also is working a really good career. So just wanted to highlight that. The other reason I wanted to cover this case is Jordan has actually been back in the news very recently. I'm going to talk about that at the end of the video, of why he's been back in the news. And the third reason is that whilst I was doing the research for this video, I was having a discussion with one of the women that I work with in my main job, and it turns out her father works for Romford police station. So just to give a backstory, I was born in Romford. That's where I grew up initially, the first 10 years of my life. Where Jordan grew up in Dagenham, it's literally the next town over, within walking distance really. And so obviously with Romford, they patrol and service all manners of part, because obviously Romford, it counts as Essex, but it is part of East London as well. And obviously this attack happened in Ilford, but Jordan was taken to Romford police station. This woman's dad, who I work with, he was the booking sergeant that booked Jordan in when he was initially arrested. I had wanted to interview him for the video, but understandably, with his line of work and everything, he wasn't able to do that. So just wanted to point out that was in the initial plans of this video. So all that said and done, we're going to get into the story of Jordan McSweeney. So Jordan, he was born in 1993, so he's just a little bit younger than I am. Couldn't find his exact date of birth, but I knew that he was just a tad bit younger. I was born in 1992. He initially grew up in Dagenham, like I said, and he was said to have had a really dysfunctional childhood. So his dad was AWOL, his mum really couldn't look after him properly, And as he grew into a teenager, he became really, really difficult for her. And obviously, Jordan is fairly a tall man, and his mum was described as quite a petite, slim woman. So Jordan was said to have been really unruly, like I said. He would trash his room, he would put holes in his walls, which is not an uncommon thing, you know. Many people, men mainly, but many people will, when they are very, very angry, rather than hitting someone, they hit something. And, you know, it's the old, like, really common joke about men in white vests punching holes in drywall or their doors. But if they need to obviously vent out their anger that they've got inside them, and rather than punching someone, they will punch something. He would graffiti his own rooms and write really disgusting things across his walls, and just regularly trash the house that he was living in. He was said to have no respect for anyone. His old neighbours actually just described him as a little shit. So Jordan, he gains a reputation for his behaviour. He started getting involved in some serious crimes as early from 2006, so he was 13 years old. So from the age of 13 to what we're going to be discussing, which happened in 2022, he was 29. Jordan had amassed 69 charges against him, ranging from racially aggravated assault, driving offences, battery, ABH, burglaries, and to what we're going to be discussing, like I said. One neighbour, she recalled having an issue with Jordan and his group of friends that she referred to as a gang. The neighbour said that they would often speed by on the pavements, down alleyways, on the streets, on their motorbikes, and this obviously caused a little bit of alarm and distress, particularly to an elderly person, you know, who's just like pottering around, doing their thing, going out, get some shopping, and all of a sudden you've got a group of kids speeding past you on bikes. It's going to be quite alarming. It's alarming for someone my age, probably someone if you're similar age or younger than me. You will find that quite alarming. So imagine what that's like for an elderly person. And Jordan is reported for this to the authorities, and obviously they give him a talking to. And instead of taking it in his stride and learning from his lesson, Jordan decides to vandalise and trash that neighbour's car. And this isn't just one isolated incident of him doing this. He's done this on multiple occasions, and he even steals it at some point. And when the car is found, Jordan's palm print is found in the car. The neighbour did, however, say that out of all of the gang, Jordan was the one that would actually stop and talk to her. His first court appearance, like I said, he was aged 13. This was due to him burglaring houses on his own street. Not always the best of things. So, obviously, a minute ago I was talking about the two brothers that I lived in the hostel with. One of the brothers, that's what he got caught for. I'm not going to name names, but that's what one of the brothers was caught for. He was burglaring houses, and you know, I had quite a few really good nights with this particular guy, and it's sort of become like a running joke, you know, that he could do anything except burgle a house. But he was kind of smart about it. He didn't particularly do it on his own street. He would go somewhere else. Jordan didn't have that brain power. He was burglaring houses, like his next door neighbours, for example. So he ends up spending a large amount of his teenage years in Borstal sort of place. If you're not sure what Borstal is, it's literally for 13 to, I don't know, 16-year-olds, I think. He's 16 or 18. Young, it's still like the one lower from young offenders institutions. This particular borstal was in Rochester in Kent, and he eventually graduated into adult prisons. In prison, he continuously shows his aggressive behaviour to both staff and the inmates. He was often found with homemade weapons in his cell. And by the 10-year period between 2012 and 2022, Jordan was reported 102 times whilst in prison, whilst serving all of his sentences. So these included the before mentioned assaults, also being found with weapons, but also with just general disobedience. In 2014, in Swaleside, HMP Swaleside, there was a riot, and Jordan was named as one of the people that was involved in that riot. Now, what actually happened was the prisoners of a particular wing, they took over the wing, and when that happens, it can be very confrontational, things get trashed, people end up being assaulted really, really severely, and it ends up with the riot squad being brought in, and even then, the prisoners don't really take any notice. They end up on the roofs. The place is absolutely demolished, and Jordan actually sets fire to, not to his neighbour's cell, to his own cell. One prison officer was actually stabbed in the head whilst this was happening. Luckily, he didn't die from his injuries. He had a quite substantial wound to his scalp, but was able to be treated. I can imagine he probably didn't want to go back there. A lot of prison officers, because it's such an underpaid, underappreciated job, that he probably just walked away from that service. I wouldn't blame him if he did. So like I said, obviously Jordan sets fire to his own cell, and surprisingly after this, not long after this, Jordan is released from custody. But instead of, trying to go on the straight and narrow, thinking, I don't want to go through that again, that experience was really tough, Jordan just uses it as a base to brag about it. He wears it as a badge of honour that he's been to prison. He would often be on social media bragging about court appearances. And people who knew Jordan personally said that Jordan wanted to be known as a gangster. And obviously, when you look at Jordan, you're not thinking of, I don't know, like a sort of Cray twins gangster that have a certain something about them. I know obviously what the Crays did was really bad, but they were always suited and booted, They were well known in their area as for being very suited and booted, come from a lot of money. You look at Jordan and you don't get Cray twin sort of gangster, you just get the gang leader sort of that wants to be known as a gangster but they're not a gangster. Then on his social medias, he was just, on Facebook, you've got those games. It's like, what type of leader were you born to be? What type of animal will you be reincarnated in those sort of games? A lot of people like to play them. I've dabbled with them in the past. There was one particular one, and it was, what type of leader are you born to be, Jordan? And it literally comes up as gang leader, so I'm just going to post that here. His assaults didn't just happen to his cellmates and officers. Many, many, many ex-partners of Jordan's come forward and spoke about the abuse that he put them through. And this went back to as early as August 2010, so this is around the year that I met him. He was 17 years old. So when he's 17, the police had told him an assault where Jordan had pushed his ex down the stairs, pulled her hair, strangled her, and generally just absolutely abused this poor girl. She obviously goes to the police, he's arrested. And all he tells the officers is he reacted that way because she was going on too much. What he means by that is obviously just general sort of answering back, and obviously that's just human nature, She's standing there taking all this abuse. Of course she's going to go on. She's going to bite back, unless you're an absolute doormat. And I don't really like describing people in that way, but those kind of people that are very timid and won't say nothing. She probably wasn't that kind of person. She had a bit of strength about her. And obviously she's sticking up for herself, but he didn't like that. He wanted the doormat. And so he just says, oh, she's going on. He's given a form of detention and retraining order for this assault. And 11 years later, in 2021, so just before what happens in Ilford, he is given a 3-year restraining order from contacting another ex. And her name was Samantha Bryan. Now, Samantha had actually met Jordan when she was 14. It doesn't tell me when or how old he was when they met. Now, records showed multiple occasions of abuse that he put Samantha through. She said that, so they had been together for 4 years, dated on and off throughout those 4 years. She said that Jordan's main tactic was for him to get you on the ground, and he would kick and stamp on you, so you literally are defenceless. Now, just to pause here, obviously a couple of months ago I did the video on the attack of Charlie Nash, and I spoke about, in that video, about how chimpanzees fight, and I made a reference to this particular case, the Jordan McSweeney case. And so I had the plans to do this video at some point. But I've personally witnessed fights like this, men fighting like this. So many of you will know, if you've been watching my channel from the start, I referenced that I worked in a pub. I no longer work in that pub, but 2 years ago when I started this channel, I was. And there was a particular evening, a really severe fight kicked off, and it was in the car park. It started off in the pub and spilled out into the car park, and it ended up with one of the lads. There was a group of lads that used to come in every Friday and Saturday night, around 18, 19, 20. And whilst we all know what boys are like at that age, they could be a little bit annoying, but generally they weren't bad people. You had a laugh with them as patron and server, but a little bit of banter between the two of them, and this is what this particular group are like. Something happened. I don't know the full ins and outs of how this all started. It ended up in a big punch up, and one of the guys that was beating up this particular boy gets in his car and attempts to run him over. The boy, in retaliation, he takes off his belt, and he had a really big chunky belt buckle on, and he's hit the car with the belt and it's cracked the window. And in retaliation, the driver gets out, and him and a big group of his mates that he was with, they get this boy on the floor and they're stamping and stamping and stamping. And I've actually run in the middle of him because even though, like I said, the kid could be a little shit, I'm not going to lie, but he was a nice enough kid. I couldn't stand there and watch someone being stamped on. It was horrific. It was awful. Luckily, the police did come fairly quick, so the guys that were attacking him did scarper, and he had some pretty nasty injuries, but all in all, he got the all clear from the hospital and was discharged later on that night, so luckily nothing too serious happened to him. So this was Jordan's main tactic of his victims, and it was just obviously, like I said, it is to stop the person fighting back. They're incapable of fighting back. On another occasion, Jordan, he again has her on the floor, and he literally jumps on Samantha's head, and this causes her to sort of bounce her head off the floor quite hard. And the way his foot connected with her face, it hits her eye. And the doctors actually said that she was really lucky to not lose any sight in that particular eye. Between 2018 and 2019, Jordan is in another relationship, and she reports the exact same abuse that's going on in that relationship. Just before COVID in 2020, Jordan is serving yet another prison sentence. And he is again reported for damaging his cell. And the prison officer obviously has to go and speak to him about this. And instead of just obviously taking the punishment on the chin and saying, apologising and whatever, Jordan, he only has obviously a couple of brain cells floating around in his head, and it's just telling him to fight. Jordan threatens to kill her and tells her that she's gonna cut her head off, and that he's gonna kill her and open her up. In December 2015, he had made similar threats to another female prison officer, and in March 2017, Jordan is placed into isolation. And another officer tells him that he can't have any photos on the wall. Now, in prison cells, this is a particular thing. You cannot have any personal information or like personal photos on the wall. They give you like a board, a cork board, that's on the wall, that's designated for photos and things like that you can put pins in, but you can't actually have anything on the actual brick walls. But he's put his photos on the brick walls, so the officer has to tell him to take them down, and he responds by saying, "I've stabbed governors before, check my file and watch what happens to you." And even after all of this, even after the rap sheet that Jordan's got, like I said, 102 convictions, 102 instances, whilst in prison, Jordan is agreed to be let out on licence. It's 17th of June 2022. His licence agreement, that is to attend probation meetings, and he immediately fails this. He misses 2 meetings. And due to this, because he's not sticking to his licence agreements, the plans are put in place for him to be recalled back to prison. The only problem is they can't find Jordan. So he was bound to go back to his mother's address in Dagenham. And when they actually turn up to her address, the police turn up and she's like, "Oh, I haven't seen him." Truth of the matter was, Jordan was staying in Valentine's Park in Ilford with a friend, and his friend was living in a caravan, and there at that particular time was a fairground that had been set up. Valentine's Park, by the way, it's quite a big park. I know Ilford very, very well. A really good friend, my best friend, she lives in Barking, which is literally the town in between Dagenham and Ilford. I know Valentine's Park very, very well, and it's actually one of the parks that was reportedly the inspiration behind the song Itchy Coo Park by Small Faces. So, just a little bit of useless knowledge there. But, yeah, so that park was there. It's quite a well-known park. Now, on the 26th of June, so only 9 days after his release, Jordan and his friend are in the Grey Spoon of Ilford pub. This is a Wetherspoons pub on Ilford High Street. I've been in that pub quite a few times in my life. Lovely little place. Who doesn't like a Wetherspoons on a Friday night, cheap and cheerful. Jordan is seen harassing numerous female customers. And obviously they're all rebuffing him, they're all telling him to, jog on, whatever. And he even goes as far as starts harassing the female bar staff. And again, obviously, they're telling him to back off. And finally at 11 PM, I don't know why they didn't do this before, but finally at 11 PM, he's actually ejected and barred from the pub. This is where he and his friend part ways. Now, Jordan, instead of going back to the caravan to sleep off what he had drunk, he's very clearly inebriated. The CCTV footage shows, him staggering around. He actually spends the next few hours just wandering the streets of Ilford alone. CCTV captures his every single move from there, and Jordan is seen spotting a woman walking alone, and he actually begins following her down Romford Road. And he follows her for around 20 minutes. Now, in the CCTV, it is clear that she is aware that she's being followed. She keeps looking over her shoulder. She knows that someone's following her. And as she keeps looking over, Jordan is sort of doubling back to make it seem less obvious. So, obviously, like I said, because she's aware of him, she goes into a shop. And that's still open. And Jordan hangs around outside the shop. Little bit of time passes and he eventually enters that shop. He then leaves and he hides around the corner. The woman eventually leaves the shop and she walks past Jordan's hiding place. He turns out in the shadows and still continues to follow her. He follows her into Gloucester Road and she actually starts running to get some distance. With the running, again, she actually manages to outrun him and she's lucky and manages to get away. Jordan then identifies another potential target. He follows her. She ends up going into a chicken shop and she's just sitting there obviously eating. There's some other people that have obviously clearly enjoyed their evening and they want that hot meal on their way home. So she's just sitting there. Jordan is staring at her through the window. So he ends up walking into the shop and he doesn't buy anything. He ends up going back out the shop and he continues staring at her through the window. And he places his hand down his trousers at this point and begins masturbating. She obviously notices this. She notices Jordan. Eventually, she leaves the shop and again, Jordan begins following her down the road. And he eventually just gives up and he spots a third woman. Now, it's not established if they knew each other, him and this third woman, but the CCTV, it showed a more familial connection between these two. They are seen having a small conversation and Jordan puts his arm around her, but he then places his hand in between her legs. They walk together a little distance and then they part ways. Now, for another hour, he's just seen walking the streets in a circle. And Valentine's Park is not far from where he is at this point. It's literally within like a 10-minute walking distance. He could easily go home and sleep this off, but he doesn't. He comes up to 2 AM and he spots a fourth woman. Again, she's alone. Jordan follows her and she becomes quickly aware of this. At one point, he overtakes her on the road and he disappears into a driveway and ducks down. And in his mind, he's probably going to jump out at her. The woman, obviously, she cottons onto this and she makes that split-second decision that saves her life. She walks across the road to the other side and she enters a property. Whether or not that was her house, I don't know, but she very clearly seen entering a property, so Jordan ends up giving his pursuit on her. Jordan then spots his fifth woman, and this was 35-year-old law student Zara Alina. Now, Zara had only just qualified as a solicitor. She had actually been out celebrating. She was drinking in the Grey Spoon of Ilford, where Jordan was earlier that evening. She was with her friends, and obviously she'd been celebrating getting a job at the Royal Courts of Justice. Zara, she was an only child. She had actually been spending the past few years being the main carer of both her mother and her grandmother. Her family described her as carefree, free-spirited, and someone with just a real caring heart. So Zara, like I said, she'd been out with her friend Bamina, and they leave the pub at around 2 a.m. Now, Bamina, she calls a taxi to take her home. But Zara said that because she was really local, she would just walk that little short distance, and this is what she ends up doing. And Zara was literally only 15 minutes from her house. So they end up parting ways. Bamini, she arrives home fairly quickly, and she calls Zara to see if Zara has made it home, but she gets no reply. Now, after they had parted, Zara had walked to the junction of Northbrook and Cranbrook roads, and this is where she's spotted by Jordan. Now, like all the other women that night, he follows Zara, and literally Zara is only a few minutes from her doorstep, and she reaches a house on Cranbrook Road, and Jordan just comes running up behind her. He places one arm around her neck and one hand covering her mouth. He drags her into the driveway of a particular house. Now, luckily, this house had their own CCTV footage, literally pointed into their driveway, so this captures everything. Jordan, like I said, he grabs her from behind, one hand covering her mouth, and Zara is seen attempting to fight him back. Jordan, he manages to push her on the ground, and initially he attempts to rape her. So he manages to get her legs apart, and this, obviously he's putting all his weight on top of her. Because Zara was only a very tiny woman, she's about 5'1". Jordan is... So I'm 5'11", he was a little bit taller than me. So he was around 6'1", 6'2" maybe. And obviously all that weight on top of her prevented her from getting up. And street residents, they actually hear Zara screaming for help. They hear her shouts. One of them does call the police. Sadly, the police just do not respond in quick enough time. Jordan then quickly knocks Zara unconscious. He pulls her further into the driveway to out of view of the street lamps, and he starts removing parts of her clothing. He initially attempts to rape her, but he isn't able to get an erection. So Jordan, he quickly stands up, and he begins stamping on Zara. At one point, he gets disturbed by two people walking by, so he sort of ducks down out of view, and these two people just obviously walk by. They don't look initially into the driveway. If they did, they probably may have seen Zara unconscious, but they just casually walk by, carrying on with their conversation. Once the coast is cleared, Jordan carries on with his attack. He's stamping and kicking and stamping this over and over again. And he is seen exiting the driveway. He walks down a little bit, but he comes back. And he's continuing on this assault. At one point, he's balancing on a concrete post, and this is literally just to elicit more force in his kicks. He is then done. He searches through Zara's possessions, takes a few items, and he leaves. A few minutes later, he returns. He crouches down. He looks at Zara's face, and this is probably just to check if she was still breathing or not. I don't know. He then stamps on her another time. In total, this attack on Zara, it went on for 9 minutes, and Jordan then just casually walks back to Valentine's Park. The CCTV at this point, it just shows him staggering around, and he climbs over the fence of Valentine's Park, because obviously the chains will be on, and he goes back to the caravan. Now Zara, she's discovered by a passing couple literally not long after, and this was around 2:45 a.m. She's actually miraculously still alive at this point, and she's then taken to Royal London Hospital. So the paramedics, they tried really, really hard. Even though there's still a pulse, she's unconscious. The paramedics, they tried really hard to regain some consciousness with her, and at 4 a.m. she turns up at Royal London Hospital. Again, she's obviously put on some sort of ventilator, she's given all the care that she needs, but she's sadly pronounced dead at 9:58 a.m. that morning. The autopsy established that Zara had suffered 46 injuries. This was severe blunt force trauma to her head. She had deep cuts to her scalp, bruises to her lips and eyes, her ears and her nose. And the cause of the death, you won't be surprised, was the severe brain injuries that she has sustained. A murder investigation is quickly launched, and a few hours later, CCTV picks up Jordan walking around the fairground, and it's clear that he's got a plastic sports bag in his hand, and he later on tries to get rid of that sports bag, but not in the way that you or I would if we were in that situation. He just sort of stashes it in the ticket office. He's obviously seen walking around Valentine's Park with all the families that are out, obviously taking the children to this fairground. Police watch the footage of Zara's attack, and one particular officer just looks at it and quickly, within seconds, identifies that's Jordan McSweeney. So they track his movements from where he left, and obviously on his way back to Valentine's Park. So it was quite easy to track him. He is wearing jogging bottoms and a white vest top on that night. So officers, they trace it back to the caravan. So they go there, and Jordan is arrested at 3:45 p.m. They quickly find the bag of clothes that he's put in the ticket office, and at the station, Jordan is acting his just usual absolute tosser self. He's very threatening to the staff members. He's very threatening towards the police. Now, like I said, obviously a woman that I work with currently in my main job, her father was the one that booked him in. And he refuses to state his name, he refuses to give his address, even though he's just been arrested at the address that he was staying at. And when it's noticed that he's got injuries, Jordan says that they're dog bites, even though dog bites are very, very distinctive. But he refuses any sort of medical attention on himself. He tells them that he's been diagnosed ADHD, and he also has split personality disorder, which is now known as dissociative identity disorder. So I'm not sure when that classification came in, but obviously someone who actually has that would know that it was DID. In interview, Jordan is seen closing his eyes, he's yawning, he's laying down on the desk, unfolding head down. He tells the officer that she's boring him. And obviously then goes down the whole, not guilty and no comment route. On the 29th of June 2022, Jordan is charged with the attempted rape and the murder of Zara. And Jordan is seen crying. I highly doubt it. Obviously, it was tears for Zara or tears for what he had done, tears of guilt. It was just him feeling sorry for himself. He's now knows that he's again going back to prison. Whereas, obviously, before he would have worn that as a badge of honour. In November of 2022, he pleads guilty to his charges in court, and this was at the Old Bailey, so the biggest, most famous courthouse in London. On the 14th of December that year, he's sentenced. For the sentencing, he actually refuses to leave his cell, so the same as what Lucy Letby did, and countless other criminals will do, because they're cowards, they can't face up to their action, they don't want to face their victims' families in court, so they cowardly just hide behind their cell. Judge Mrs. Justice Chi McGrath said that she was satisfied that Jordan had always intended to kill Zara, and it's kind of clear, that's kind of obvious, that was his intention. Zara wasn't the first woman that he followed that night, she was the fifth. So there was always an intention of something that was going to happen that night, where he easily could have just walked home to the caravan and slept off while he had drunk. She sentenced Jordan to a life imprisonment with a minimum of 38 years to serve. Now, he would actually be in his 60s if parole is agreed at that particular time. Now, it was attempted to be argued during the mitigation that the attack shouldn't be taken too serious, or there should be some sort of leniency, on Jordan, because Zara was only conscious for a very small portion of that attack. Like that matters, because either way, he's still a cowardly piece of shit, and he went further than what was necessary. Well, I mean, obviously the attack wasn't necessary at all. He could have, like I said, he could have just slept it off. But he just went further and OCT with it, and there was no need for him to do what he did. The fact that they're trying to use that as a mitigation to get him off, it's absolutely disgusting. Not only is that a slap in the face for Zara's family, that's a slight and a dig on her memory, in my opinion. In the witness impact statements, Zara's family described her as the light of their lives. They said that she would walk everywhere, and Zara firmly and rightly believed that a woman should walk wherever she wanted. And of course, anyone, man, woman, child, whatever, they should be able to walk home to their place of safety in relative peace and not be harassed and not have that sort of engagement. Obviously, I doubt in an ideal world, we're not living in that, unfortunately. You only have to look at what has happened this particular week with, I've forgotten the lady's name, the lady that was stabbed on the bus, and the man just casually walks off, and controversial opinion, I know, and you only have a look at what happened with Charlie Kirk and the fallout of that. We don't live in an ideal world. We don't live in a safe world, but ideally we should. Zara's aunt, Farinaz, she said, "Our family don't want her last hours or her end to define her. Zara meant radiance, and she was the heart of her family, her community, and her friends, and that's how we want to remember her. That's what's been taken from our family, the heart of us. Now, only a year after his sentencing, so obviously initially he's sentenced to 38 years, Jordan actually appeals that sentence. He believes that it was just too harsh. And surprisingly, the courts of appeal agree with him. And on the grounds of his appeal, his sentence is reduced to 33 years. This was in November of 2023. Earlier that same year, whilst serving his sentence at HMP Belmarsh, it was found that Jordan had been having a sexual relationship with a workshop instructor. Her name was Hayley Jones. She's 33 years old at the time. And this affair had been going on for around a month, so from March to April of 2023. They end up being called for this. Both Jordan and Hayley are charged, and the court case for this is still ongoing. Now, Jordan, again, he's just shown what kind of coward and what kind of man he was, or man, should we say. He, again, refuses to leave his cell to give evidence, and he's basically says that he's having trouble walking. Having no trouble having sex, clearly, but yeah, all of a sudden he's now having trouble walking and getting out of his cell. And he was only meant to do this, give evidence by video link. Understandably, he's serving sentence, but he just completely refuses to do this, and he leaves Hayley to take the rap by herself. And don't worry, I'm not feeling sorry for Hayley whatsoever. At her hearing, Hayley pled guilty, and Jordan, like I said, he refuses to leave. And like I said, this is still an ongoing trial at the moment. A provisional trial is set to begin in April 2026. So this was obviously what I'm referring to at the beginning of this video with Jordan being back in the paper. So this was only reported a few months ago. He is now serving his sentence at HMP Long Lartin. So obviously, because of what happened, he had to be moved out of Belmarsh. So unfortunately, that is where I have to cut off this video. I don't have any further information on what's going on with the court case with Hayley. Obviously, I look forward to finding out in April what goes on and what happens with her in regards, and whether or not his sentence is going to be extended. I'd love to know your thoughts and feelings on this case, guys. If you feel like you can add anything else, if you feel like I've left anything out, please feel free to comment. I always read your comments. Just obviously, please be saving the fact that obviously Jordan is going to be a very old man by the time he gets out, but to be honest, I don't think he should be released. Even after 33 years, I don't think he should be released. He's made it clear time and time again that he cannot be changed. And if the police had been able to find him earlier, so many ifs and buts, but obviously if that paperwork initially had not been signed on the 17th of June 2022, I wouldn't be talking about this case. Zara would be, living out her dream job, and Jordan would just be a nobody. But instead, like I said, we do not live in a perfect world. We live in an imperfect world where, sadly, people on the streets, women, children, and in some cases men, are not safe at all. So, just a massive thank you to everyone who stuck with me for the past 50 minutes while I rambled on. Just a huge thank you to you all. I will be back next month with another True Crime Stories with Silhouette. So if you've got any suggestions, please let me know. Also, to let you know, obviously I still run my quiz nights, so keep an eye out if you follow me on Instagram and things like that, or TikTok, that I promote my quiz nights on there. So if it happens that I happen to get a gig near you, then why not come down, say hi. And like I said, just let me know of any cases. Stay safe, guys, and I'll see you real soon. Take care.